pressed his hand against the cold glass and stared at the ships. Hundreds of them floated in the darkness of space, each one carrying diplomats from worlds he had only read about in files. Some ships were sleek and silver, moving like fish through water. Others were massive and angular, covered in symbols he could not read. A few glowed with colors that hurt to look at for too long. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Park walked up beside him, carrying a data pad that displayed information about 30 different alien species. "I still can't believe we're here." Smiled but did not take his eyes off the view. Nexus Station was the largest structure humans had ever seen. It hung in neutral space between 7 major star systems, a place where wars were forbidden and disputes were solved with words instead of weapons. Earth had fought for 50 years just to get an invitation to this place. "We've come a long way," said quietly. 80 years ago, we didn't even know aliens existed. Now we're here, asking them to accept us as equals. Looked at her pad and frowned. "Some of them don't think we belong here. Did you read the reports about the Empire? They think we're too young, too primitive. They've been traveling between stars for over 10,000 years. "Then we'll show them they're wrong," said. He turned away from the window and straightened his jacket. "Come on. Ambassador wants to brief us before the opening ceremony." The briefing room was small and plain compared to the grand halls of Nexus Station. Ambassador sat at the head of a table, his gray hair neatly combed, his expression serious. Lee, the youngest member of their team, was already seated, nervously tapping her fingers on the table. "Good you're here," said as and took their seats. "Let me be direct. Earth's membership in the Galactic Council is provisional. That means we're on trial. One major mistake, one diplomatic incident, and we could be expelled for decades." "No pressure then," muttered. Ignored her comment. "There are 47 species represented at this summit. Most of them are curious about us but cautious. They want to see how we handle ourselves. They want to know if we can be trusted." "What about the?" asked. "The reports say they have significant influence in the Council." "The Empire controls 47 star systems," explained. "They're one of the oldest civilizations in this part of the galaxy. They value tradition, hierarchy, and what they call ancient wisdom. They look down on younger species." "So they look down on us," said. "Yes, but they also respect strength and dignity. If we show them we deserve respect, they might support our full membership. If we seem weak or desperate, they'll vote against us." Leaned forward. "I'm telling you this because their princess will be at this summit. Princess Thera. She's young by their standards, only 19 years old, but her species lives for 300 years. This is her first major diplomatic assignment." A teenager said, "Great." "Don't underestimate her," warned. "She's royalty and she knows it. Be polite, be professional, and whatever happens, don't lose your temper." The opening ceremony was overwhelming. The main hall was enormous, with a ceiling so high that clouds could have formed beneath it. Delegates from dozens of worlds stood in groups, their conversations creating a noise like 1,000 different songs played at once. Some spoke in voices that sounded like music. Others communicated through colors that rippled across their skin. A few didn't speak at all, using translators that hummed and clicked. Watched it all, trying to memorize every detail. A delegate with blue skin and 4 arms bowed to him in greeting. A creature that looked like living crystal offered what the translator called a gesture of peaceful meeting. Everywhere he looked, there was something new, something impossible, something wonderful. "The delegation is arriving," whispered, pointing toward the main entrance. The hall grew quieter. Even species that had been arguing moments before stopped to watch. A group of tall figures entered, moving with perfect coordination. They wore robes that seemed to shift colors in the light, and their skin was pale with patterns like silver tattoos. Guards flanked them on both sides, carrying weapons that hummed with contained energy. In the center of the group was Princess Thera. She was beautiful in a way that seemed almost unreal. Her features were sharp and perfect, her eyes were large and bright, and she moved like someone who had never stumbled in her entire life. But there was something in the way she looked at the room, something cold and dismissive, that made uncomfortable. "She's younger than I expected," whispered. "She looks like she owns the place," added. The delegation moved through the hall, and other delegates stepped aside to let them pass. Princess Thera did not acknowledge most of them. She spoke only to a tall figure beside her, an ancient-looking with robes more elaborate than the others. "That's High Chancellor," said, checking her pad. "He's her primary advisor, very old, very respected." Eventually, the group reached the area where the human delegation stood. Ambassador stepped forward and bowed in the formal style that the briefing had taught them. "Princess Thera, on behalf of Earth, we are honored to meet you," said clearly. Thera's eyes passed over him without interest. She turned to her chancellor and spoke in her own language, which the translator rendered in a flat, mechanical voice. "These are the primitives from Earth, the ones who still fight wars among themselves." The chancellor replied quietly, too soft for the translator to pick up. Felt his jaw tighten but kept his expression neutral. Beside him, he could feel tense up. Continued as if he had not heard the insult. "May I introduce my team? This is our chief cultural liaison." Stepped forward and bowed. Thera looked at him for exactly 1 second, then looked away. "Yes, yes," she said dismissively. "I'm sure we'll have time for introductions later. Chancellor, I want to meet the ambassador. I've heard their art collection is impressive." She walked past the human delegation without another word. Her entourage followed, leaving the human standing in uncomfortable silence. "Well," said quietly, "that went well." "Stay focused," said, his voice tight. "This is exactly what we expected. We're here to prove ourselves, not to win popularity contests." Watched the princess disappear into the crowd. He had met arrogant people before, powerful people who believed their status made them better than others. But there was something about the way Thera had looked through him, as if he was not even worth acknowledging, that bothered him more than he wanted to admit. "Come on," said, touching his arm gently. "The delegation wants to meet us. They're supposed to be friendly." Nodded and followed his team. But as he walked away, he could not help glancing back at the princess, wondering if the next few days would be as difficult as he was beginning to suspect. The summit had just begun, and already the challenges were clear. They were not just representing Earth. They were representing every human who had ever looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there. They could not afford to fail. But they also could not afford to lose themselves in the process. 3 days into the summit was beginning to feel hopeful. The initial meetings had gone better than expected. Several species had expressed interest in Earth's technology, particularly in medical research and renewable energy. A few had even complimented humanity's artistic achievements, asking for samples of music and literature to study. The morning session took place in a smaller conference hall, designed for detailed discussions about trade and cultural exchange. 20 delegations sat around a circular table, with translators hovering above each group like small clouds. Had spent the previous night preparing his presentation, going over every word with until they were both satisfied. "Remember," had said, "focus on what makes us unique, not our technology or our resources, but our perspective." Now, standing before the assembled delegates, felt the weight of that advice. He took a breath and began. "Distinguished delegates, I want to talk about resilience," he said. "Earth has faced many challenges. We've survived wars, diseases, natural disasters, and our own mistakes. We've made terrible errors in judgment. We've hurt ourselves and our world. But every time we've fallen, we've learned something. We've changed. We've grown." A delegate from the assembly nodded slowly, their feathers rustling with approval. The representative, a small being with large eyes, leaned forward with interest. "Humanity believes that wisdom comes not from avoiding failure, but from learning how to rise after falling," continued. "We don't claim to be perfect. We don't even claim to be advanced, but we offer something valuable, a different perspective born from struggle and survival. We believe that diversity makes us stronger, that new ideas should be welcomed, not feared. Several delegates made gestures of agreement. Even Ambassador, watching from the side, allowed himself a small smile. But Princess Thera looked bored. She sat with her delegation near the center of the table, her expression distant, as if she was thinking about something more important. Her chancellor whispered something to her, but she waved him away with an irritated gesture. Finished his presentation and sat down. The delegate immediately began asking questions about Earth's cultural preservation efforts. A discussion started about how younger civilizations could contribute fresh insights to old problems. It was exactly the kind of conversation had hoped for. Then Thera laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. It was sharp and cutting, designed to draw attention. The discussion stopped. Everyone turned to look at her. "I apologize for interrupting," Thera said, though her tone suggested she was not sorry at all. "But I find this conversation amusing." High Chancellor touched her arm gently. "Princess, perhaps." "No, Chancellor, I think this needs to be said." She looked directly at for the first time since they had arrived at Nexus Station. Her eyes were bright and cold. "You speak of resilience as if it's a virtue, but what you call resilience, the rest of us call simple stubbornness." Felt the temperature in the room change, stiffened beside him. Eyes went wide. "You celebrate surviving your own stupidity," Thera continued. "You're proud of recovering from wars you started, diseases you could have prevented, disasters you caused through carelessness. You speak of learning from mistakes as if making constant mistakes is somehow admirable." She stood up and her voice grew sharper. "The Empire has existed for 10,000 years. We have not had a war in 6,000 years. We do not have the diseases that plagued your world. We do not destroy our own environment and then congratulate ourselves for partially fixing it. Do you know why? Because we evolved past such primitive behavior." The room was completely silent now. Even the translators seemed to hum more quietly. "You call yourselves resilient," Thera said, her gaze locked on. "Perhaps if your species was more evolved, more civilized, you would not need resilience. Perhaps you would simply be wise enough not to fall in the first place. But I suppose when you live for only 70 or 80 years, you don't have time to develop real wisdom." She sat down, looking satisfied with herself. Her chancellor closed his eyes as if in pain. Every delegate in the room turned to look at. This was the test, he realized, not of humanity's technology or resources, but of their character. How would he respond? With anger, with defensiveness, with an attempt to argue? Looked at Princess Thera for a long moment. He studied her face, her posture, the way she held herself. She expected him to react. She wanted him to argue, to defend humanity, to prove her point about primitive emotions and lack of control. He felt something then, but it was not anger. It was disappointment. This young princess, given every advantage in life, had learned nothing about the universe beyond her own superiority. She had knowledge but no wisdom. She had power but no understanding. And she was not ready to hear anything different, no matter how he said it. Stood up slowly. He gathered his data pad and his notes with careful, deliberate movements. Then he turned to the other delegates and bowed formally. "Please excuse me," he said, his voice calm and clear. "I have more productive ways to spend my time." He turned toward the exit. "What?" Thera's voice cracked with surprise. "Where do you think you're going?" Did not answer. He did not look back. He simply walked. "I am speaking to you." Thera stood up again, her voice rising. "You cannot just leave. I am Princess Thera of the Imperial Dynasty. When I speak, you listen." Reached the door. His hand was steady as he opened it. "Return here immediately," Thera demanded. "This is disrespectful, this is." The door closed behind him, cutting off her words. The corridor outside was quiet. Stood there for a moment, letting his heartbeat slow. He had just walked away from one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. He had potentially ruined Earth's chances at full council membership. He had gone against every diplomatic protocol. But he had also refused to accept disrespect. He had shown that humans knew their own worth, that they did not need approval from those who refused to see them clearly. Behind him, the door opened again. Stepped out, followed by. They did not speak, just took positions on either side of him. A moment later, they walked together down the corridor, three humans who had chosen dignity over appeasement. Inside the conference room, chaos erupted. Delegates spoke in urgent voices, debating what had just happened. Some were shocked, others impressed, a few confused. Princess Thera stood frozen, staring at the closed door. Her face showed an expression she had never worn before, uncertainty. No one had ever simply walked away from her. People argued with her, agreed with her, tried to please her, but they never just left. "What just happened?" she asked, her voice quiet. High Chancellor stood slowly, his ancient face tired. "You insulted someone, Princess, and they decided you were not worth their time." "But I'm—" "Yes, you are a princess. You are royalty, you have status and power." The Chancellor's voice was gentle but firm. "But that human just taught you something our tutors never could. Status means nothing if you do not deserve respect, and respect cannot be demanded. It can only be earned." Thera sat down heavily, still staring at the door. For the first time in her 19 years of life, she had no idea what to do next. Ambassador cleared his throat and stood up. "If the Council would allow me to continue the session, I would be happy to discuss humanity's proposals for cultural exchange." The delegate made a sound of approval. "Yes, let us continue. I for one am more interested in humanity than I was before." The session resumed, but Princess Thera did not hear any of it. She was too busy replaying the moment in her mind, trying to understand why the human's quiet departure bothered her more than if he had shouted or argued. Outside, walking through the beautiful corridors of Nexus Station, finally allowed himself to smile. It was small and tired, but it was real. He had no idea what would happen next, but he knew one thing for certain. He had stayed true to himself, and that was worth more than any diplomatic victory. The news spread through Nexus Station like fire through dry grass. Within hours, every delegation knew about the incident. A human had walked away from Princess Thera. The young, arrogant princess had been dismissed like she was nothing. The gossip traveled through formal channels and informal ones, growing with each retelling. In her private quarters, Thera paced back and forth, her robes swishing with each angry step. Her rooms were luxurious, filled with art and technology that most species could only dream of. But she saw none of it. Her mind kept replaying that moment when the human turned his back on her. "How dare he?" she said for the 10th time. "How dare he treat me with such disrespect?" High Chancellor sat in a chair, watching her pace. He looked tired, older than his many years. "Princess, perhaps you should consider." "Consider what? That I should accept insults from primitives?" Thera stopped and turned to face him. "I am the daughter of Emperor. My family has ruled for 8,000 years. That human should have been honored that I even spoke to him." "You did not speak to him, Princess. You spoke at him. There is a difference." "I told him the truth. His species is young and foolish. They make mistakes constantly. She stopped, frustrated. "Why are you taking his side?" "I am not taking sides. I am trying to teach you something important." Stood slowly, his joints creaking. "Do you know what happened after you left the conference room?" "I don't care." 3 other delegations requested private meetings with the human delegation. The assembly expressed interest in a trade agreement. Even the who rarely commit to anything said they were impressed by human dignity. Walked to the window, looking out at the stars. "You tried to diminish the humans, and instead, you raised them up." Thera felt something twist in her stomach. "That's impossible. I showed everyone how primitive they are." "No, Princess, You showed everyone how young you are." The words hit her like a physical blow. Before she could respond, bowed and left the room, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Across the station, in much simpler quarters, the human delegation gathered, sat on a plain chair staring at his hands, and sat nearby while Ambassador stood by the window. "That could have gone better," said quietly. "Or worse," added. "We could have lost our tempers, we could have argued, did exactly the right thing." "Did I?" Looked up. "I might have ruined everything, Earth's membership, our reputation." "Stop," said firmly. He turned from the window and there was something like pride in his eyes. "I have been a diplomat for 30 years. I have bowed to people who did not deserve respect. I have smiled at insults and swallowed my anger because I thought that was what diplomacy meant. But today, you taught me something." "What's that, sir?" "That sometimes the most diplomatic thing you can do is refuse to accept disrespect," smiled. "The claim to value dignity and self-worth. You showed them what those things actually look like." A soft chime interrupted them, checked her data pad, and her eyes widened. "We have 4 meeting requests. The one to discuss medical technology exchange, the one to talk about cultural programs, and 2 species I've never even heard of want to meet the human who walked away." "You're serious?" Grab the pad and read the messages. "This is real." "Apparently, walking away from a princess is good publicity," said with a small laugh. Over the next day, the reactions continued to pour in. Some species found the incident amusing. The ambassador told privately that Princess Thera had needed someone to challenge her arrogance for years. A delegate from the cluster said it was the most entertaining thing that had happened at a summit in decades. But not everyone was pleased. The delegation sent a formal complaint to the council, demanding an apology. Several traditional species who valued hierarchy expressed concern about a lower species showing disrespect to royalty. The council scheduled a private hearing to discuss the incident. Stood before a panel of 5 senior council members representing different regions of the galaxy. They sat in a semicircle, their expressions unreadable. "Of Earth," the head counselor said, a being whose species looked like living stone. "You are here because you walked away from a diplomatic discussion. Some say this was disrespectful, others say it was justified. We want to hear your explanation." Had prepared a speech, full of diplomatic language and careful explanations. But standing there, looking at these ancient beings, he decided to tell the simple truth. "Princess Thera insulted my entire species," he said clearly. "She said we were primitive and stupid. She mocked our struggles and our achievements. She made it clear that she saw us as beneath her." "And this angered you?" another counselor asked. "No, it disappointed me," chose his words carefully. "I have met many people who disagree with me. I have met people who think humans are too young for the council. That's fine. Disagreement is healthy, but the princess was not disagreeing. She was dismissing us without even trying to understand us." "So you walked away?" "Yes, because I realized that she was not ready to listen, and I am not required to stand there and accept insults just because someone has a title." Stood. "On Earth, we have a saying, respect is earned, not demanded. I will show respect to anyone who shows it in return, but I will not bow to someone simply because they tell me to." The room was quiet. The counselors looked at each other, communicating in ways could not see. Finally, the head counselor spoke. "The council finds no fault in your actions. You were insulted and chose to remove yourself from a hostile situation. This is acceptable diplomatic behavior. However," he paused, "we encourage you to be open to future discussions with the delegation, should they approach you with proper respect." "Of course, Counselor." As left the hearing, he felt lighter than he had in days. The council had sided with him. Earth's reputation was not ruined. In fact, according to the messages kept showing him, humanity's standing had actually improved. But the most interesting reaction came that evening. was walking through one of the station's gardens, a beautiful space filled with plants from 100 worlds. He came to a bench overlooking a small pond that somehow held water in zero gravity, and he sat down to think. He did not notice the figure watching him from behind a cluster of tall, blue plants. Princess Thera stood in the shadows, hidden from view. She had been following the human for the past hour, though she would die before admitting it. She watched him sit alone, looking tired but peaceful. He did not look angry or smug. He did not look like someone who had just won a victory. He looked like someone who had done what he believed was right, and was now dealing with the consequences. Thera thought about what her chancellor had said. She thought about the other delegates' reactions. She thought about how, for the first time in her life, someone had looked at her and decided she was not worth their time. It bothered her more than she wanted to admit. She watched stand up and walk away, his movements calm and unhurried. And for the first time since the incident, Princess Thera began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she had made a mistake. High Chancellor found her still standing in the garden an hour later. Observing the human's princess, he asked gently. "I don't understand them," she admitted quietly. "He should be angry, he should be gloating, he should be doing something other than just sitting in a garden." "Perhaps that is exactly why he was able to walk away," said. "He knows who he is. Your words could not change that, so why would he be angry?" Thera was silent for a long time. Then, so quietly the Chancellor almost missed it, she said, "I think I need to learn about these humans. Really learn, not just read the official reports." Smiled. It was the first time he had smiled in days. "Now, Princess, you are beginning to show wisdom." Thera could not sleep. She lay in her enormous bed, surrounded by silks that cost more than some planets earned in a year, and stared at the ceiling. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the human's face as he looked at her before walking away. Not angry, not afraid, just disappointed. Finally, she gave up and went to her personal computer terminal. She told herself she was just curious, that this meant nothing. But her hands moved quickly, pulling up files about Earth and its people. The official reports she had read before were short and dismissive. Primitive species, recent space capability, internal conflicts, short, limited technological advancement. She had barely glanced at them before deciding humans were not worth her attention. Now she went deeper. She found historical records, detailed and brutal. Humans had fought wars that killed millions. They had created diseases and then struggled to cure them. They had poisoned their own planet and nearly destroyed themselves dozens of times. Everything she had said in the conference room was factually correct. But as she kept reading, she began to see patterns she had missed before. Every time humans fell, they got back up. After their worst wars, they created organizations to prevent future conflicts. After their deadliest plagues, they developed medicine that saved billions. When they nearly destroyed their environment, they changed their entire civilization to protect it. They failed constantly, but they never stopped trying to do better. Thera found recordings of human music. She had expected something crude, but what she heard made her stop and listen. There was a piece called a symphony, written by someone named. The music moved through sadness and struggle, then rose into something beautiful and triumphant. It told a story without words, and that story was about hope. She found human poetry, words about love and loss, about mistakes and forgiveness, about looking at the stars and wondering what was out there. One poem talked about falling down 7 times and standing up 8. Such a simple idea, but it carried weight. Most interesting were the philosophical writings. Humans spent enormous amounts of time questioning themselves. Are we doing the right thing? How can we be better? What do we owe to each other? They doubted themselves constantly, arguing about morality and purpose and meaning. Thera realized something that made her uncomfortable. They had stopped asking these questions thousands of years ago. They had decided they were correct about everything, and that was that. They had achieved perfection, or so they believed, so why question anything? But was that wisdom, or was it just stopping? As the station's artificial dawn began to brighten her windows, Thera was still reading. She had been awake all night, and she felt strange. Not tired, exactly. More like someone who had been seeing in black and white and suddenly discovered color. Over the next 2 days, Thera did something she had never done before. She watched. She observed the human delegation from a distance, careful not to be seen. She watched them interact with other species, noting how they treated everyone the same way. Spoke to a powerful ambassador with the same respect he showed to a maintenance worker who cleaned the halls. When a young delegate from a minor species asked for advice, the humans spent an hour helping them prepare for a presentation. She saw share human music with a group of aliens who had never heard anything like it. Some of them cried. One said it was the most beautiful thing they had experienced in decades. She saw notice that an older delegate was struggling to reach a high shelf. Without being asked, she got what they needed and handed it to them with a smile. Such a small thing, but the delegate looked grateful. And she saw mediate a dispute between two species who had been arguing for hours. He did not take sides. Instead, he asked questions, helping each side understand the other's perspective. By the end, they were not exactly friends, but they had reached a compromise. Watching all of this, Thera felt something she had rarely experienced: shame. She found herself in the station's central garden again, the same place where she had watched before. This time, she was not hiding. She sat on a bench, thinking about everything she had learned. Beautiful here, isn't it? Thera jumped. She had not heard anyone approach. Park stood a few feet away, holding a cup of something that steamed gently. Yes, it is, Thera said carefully. Mind if I sit? Asked. The other benches are full. Thera wanted to say no, wanted to maintain her distance, but she found herself nodding. Sat down with a comfortable sigh. She did not seem nervous or angry. She just sat there, drinking her tea and looking at the plants. What is that? Thera asked, pointing at the cup. Tea, it's a human drink. We make it by soaking dried leaves in hot water, smiled. I know it sounds strange, but it's comforting. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Thera asked, Why aren't you angry with me? Looked at her with surprise. Angry about what? About what I said. About your species being primitive and stupid. Oh, that. Took another sip of tea. Well, you're entitled to your opinion. And honestly, we are kind of primitive compared to most species here. We only got to space 80 years ago. You've been traveling between stars for thousands of years. But you're not angry. Why would I be angry about facts? Shrugged. We are young. We do make a lot of mistakes. But that doesn't mean we're stupid. It means we're learning. There's a difference. Thera absorbed this. Your colleague, was he hurt by what I said? Considered the question. Hurt? No, I don't think so. Disappointed, maybe. He had hoped to have a real conversation with you to exchange ideas. When he realized you had already decided we weren't worth listening to, he saw no point in staying. So he just left. Yes, knows who he is. Your opinion of him doesn't change that. So why would he waste his energy arguing with someone who's already made up their mind? Finished her tea. I should get back. We have meetings all afternoon. It was nice talking to you, Princess. She stood up and walked away, leaving Thera alone with her thoughts. That evening, Thera did something that shocked her attendants. She asked High Chancellor to tell her about history, but not the glorious parts. She wanted to know about their mistakes. Mistakes, Princess, looked puzzled. Yes, we must have made some. No species is perfect from the beginning, right? Was quiet for a long moment, then he began to speak. He told her about the early days of the Empire when they had been explorers and learners. They had made terrible mistakes. They had destroyed 2 of their own colony worlds through carelessness. They had nearly caused a war through arrogance. They had learned hard lessons about humility and respect. But that was 8,000 years ago. Since then, they had stopped making mistakes, but they had also stopped growing. They had become so focused on maintaining their perfection that they had forgotten how to change. "We are comfortable, Princess," said sadly, "but comfort is not the same as wisdom. The humans make mistakes constantly, yes, but they also learn constantly. They grow, they change, they become better. When was the last time our empire truly changed anything important?" Thera could not answer. That night she lay in bed again, but this time she was not frustrated. She was thinking about the human who had walked away and about what that meant. He had walked away because she was not ready to listen. Not because he was weak, but because he was strong enough to know his own worth. He did not need her approval. He did not need her to understand him. He knew who he was, and that was enough. Thera realized that she had no idea who she was. She was a princess. She was royalty. She had status and power. But if all of that was taken away, what would be left? She had spent 19 years being told she was special because of her birth. But the human was special because of his choices. He chose to be respectful. He chose to be kind. He chose to walk away from insult rather than lower himself to respond to it. For the first time in her life, Princess Thera understood what it meant to earn respect rather than demand it. And she realized she had a lot to learn. The message arrived on data pad during breakfast. It was formal and carefully worded, but the meaning was clear. Princess Thera requested a private meeting with the human delegation at their earliest convenience. "It's probably a trap," said, reading over his shoulder. "She wants to insult us again, but this time in private where it won't hurt her reputation." "Maybe," said thoughtfully, "or maybe she wants to apologize." "The proud princess apologized to us," laughed. "I'll believe that when I see it." Stared at the message. He had spent the past few days trying not to think about the princess. The incident was over, and dwelling on it served no purpose. But now she was reaching out, and he had to decide how to respond. "We should meet with her," he said finally. "Are you sure?" Looked worried. "What if she tries to cause another scene?" "Then we'll walk away again," said simply. "But if there's even a small chance she wants to have a real conversation, we should give her that chance. That's what we do, right? We give people chances." Ambassador, who had been listening quietly, nodded. "I agree. Meet with her, but in a neutral location. One of the public gardens where others can see you. If she's sincere, the location won't matter. If she's not, at least you'll have witnesses." 2 hours later stood in the Eastern Garden, a beautiful space filled with flowering plants from a dozen worlds. He had come alone, as the message requested, and waited nearby, ready to step in if needed. Princess Thera arrived exactly on time. She wore simpler robes than before, and she was accompanied by only one guard who stayed at the garden entrance. This was unusual for royalty, and understood it as a gesture of some kind. She walked toward him slowly, and for the first time since they had met, she looked uncertain. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "Your message said you wanted to talk," replied. His voice was neutral, not friendly but not hostile either. "Yes, Thera stopped, seeming to struggle with words. "I owe you an apology. What I said in the conference room was wrong. It was cruel and unfair, and you did not deserve it." Studied her face, looking for signs of deception or mockery. He found none. She looked uncomfortable, like someone doing something difficult for the first time. "Why?" he asked. "Why what? Why do you want to apologize now? You seemed very certain of your opinions before." Thera flinched slightly but did not look away. "Because I was wrong. I judged your entire species based on prejudice and ignorance. I did not try to understand you. I just decided you were beneath me because you were younger and less advanced." She paused. "I have spent the last few days learning about humanity. Really learning, not just reading summary reports. And I realized that I had missed something important." "What's that?" "That wisdom is not the same as age. That strength is not the same as power. That being young does not mean being foolish. Thera's hands twisted together nervously. You walked away from me and I could not understand why. I thought you were being disrespectful, but you were not. You were showing me that I had not earned the right to your time or attention. Felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. This was not what he had expected. Apology accepted, he said. Just like that. Just like that, you made a mistake, you recognized it, you apologized. That takes courage, especially for someone in your position. He gestured to a bench. Would you like to sit? We could talk if you want. Really talk, I mean. Thera looked surprised, then grateful. They sat down, and for a moment neither spoke. The garden was peaceful around them, filled with gentle sounds and sweet scents. Can I ask you something? Thera said finally. Of course. Why did you walk away? The real reason. You could have argued with me. You could have defended humanity. You could have tried to change my mind. Thought about how to answer. Because you were not ready to listen. I have learned that some people are not ready to hear what you have to say, no matter how you say it. And that is okay. It is not my job to make you ready. That is your job. But how do you know when someone is ready? You don't always. Sometimes you have to try and see what happens. But that day in that room, I could see that you had already decided what you thought about humans. Nothing I said was going to change that. So I chose to respect myself instead of trying to earn respect from someone who was not willing to give it. Thera absorbed this. In my culture, walking away is seen as weakness. We are taught to stand our ground, to defend our positions. And in mine, we have a saying, do not throw pearls before swine. It means do not waste valuable things on people who cannot appreciate them. Smiled slightly. I am not calling you a swine, by the way, but the principle is the same. I could have spent hours arguing with you and it would not have mattered, so I chose to spend my time more wisely. On what? On meeting with species who actually wanted to talk to me, on learning about other cultures, on doing the work I came here to do. He looked at her directly. You may not realize this, but your insult did me a favor. It showed other species that humans know their own worth. Several delegations approached us because they respected the way I handled the situation. Thera looked down at her hands. I did not mean to help you. I know, but that is what happened anyway. Funny how things work sometimes. They talked for over an hour. Thera asked questions about Earth and answered honestly, not hiding the bad parts but also explaining the good. He told her about human art and music, about philosophy and science, about the constant struggle to be better. In return, Thera talked about the Empire, about how beautiful it was but also how stagnant, about how her people had stopped questioning themselves thousands of years ago, believing they had reached perfection. But perfection is boring, she admitted. Nothing changes, nothing grows. We have not created any truly new art in centuries. We just repeat what worked before. Growth requires discomfort, said. You have to be willing to make mistakes, to look foolish, to fail. That is hard, especially when you have a reputation to maintain. How do humans deal with that, with the fear of failure? We fail anyway. We fail all the time, but we have learned that failure is not the end. It is just information. It tells us what does not work so we can try something different. He smiled. Some of humanity's greatest discoveries came from mistakes. We are very good at making mistakes. Thera laughed, and it sounded different from the cold laugh in the conference room. This one was warm and genuine. As the artificial sun began to set in the station's sky, Thera stood up. Thank you for talking with me. You did not have to, and I appreciate that you did. Thank you for being willing to listen, said, standing as well. I have one more question, Thera said. When you return to Earth, would you be willing to help set up a cultural exchange program between your world and mine? I think my people could learn a lot from humanity, and I hope we could teach you some things too. Extended his hand, a human gesture of agreement. Thera looked at it, confused for a moment, then took it. They shook hands and something like friendship passed between them. 6 months later, the cultural exchange program was in full operation. Young traveled to Earth to study human art and philosophy. Humans visited the Empire to learn about their technology and history. It was not always smooth, but it was always interesting. Thera became an advocate for change in her own empire, arguing that tradition should be respected but not. She faced opposition from those who feared change, but she also found unexpected support from those who had been quietly questioning the old ways for years. Received regular messages from her, asking for advice on everything from diplomatic strategy to personal doubts. He always replied honestly, treating her not as a princess but as a friend. One day, a message arrived that was different from the others. "I am facing strong opposition in my father's court," Thera wrote. "They say I have been corrupted by primitive ideas. They want me to stop pushing for change. Part of me wants to give up, to go back to the way things were. It was easier. What should I do?" Thought carefully about his response. Then he typed, "Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away from those who refuse to grow and toward those who do. Trust yourself to know the difference. You are stronger than you think and wiser than you know. Whatever you decide, make sure it is your decision, not someone else's." He sent the message and returned to his work. He did not know if it would help, but he hoped it would. On the other side of the galaxy, in a grand palace on a world humans had never seen, Princess Thera read the message 3 times. Then she stood up, straightened her robes, and walked toward her father's throne room. She had a proposal to make, and she was not going to walk away from it. She had learned, after all, that walking away was for people who were not worth your time. Her people were worth it. Her empire was worth it. And she was going to fight for them, even if it was difficult, even if she failed. Because she had learned something from a human who walked away. Real strength is knowing who you are and refusing to accept less. She smiled as she entered the throne room, ready to face whatever came next.